A divisive movement in Indonesia. The Pemesta Rebellion. The Pemesta Rebellion, a significant episode in Indonesia's post-independence history, was a manifestation of regional discontent and political discord. Declared on March 2, 1957, by civil and military leaders in East Indonesia, Pemesta, an acronym for Perjuangan Semesta, meaning Universal Struggle Charter, was both a regional movement and a reaction to perceived central government injustices. The rebellion was deeply intertwined with the broader PRRI rebellion, the revolutionary government of the Republic of Indonesia, reflecting a complex interplay of local grievances and national political dynamics. The roots of the Pemesta rebellion lay in a confluence of economic, ethnic, and political factors. Key regions involved in the rebellion, such as Sulawesi and Central Sumatra, felt marginalized by Jakarta's policies, which they argued stagnated their local economies and hindered regional development. This economic dissatisfaction was compounded by ethnic tensions, particularly resentment towards the Javanese, who dominated Indonesia's political landscape. The centralization of political power on the island of Java, while other islands bore the brunt of economic resource extraction, fueled a sense of inequity and exploitation among the rebels. Despite these grievances, the rebellion was not driven by a desire for secession but rather a push for a fairer distribution of economic and political power within the Indonesian state. The rebels sought greater autonomy and more equitable economic policies, hoping to redress the imbalances that they believed were hampering their region's progress. In the early stages, civil and military leaders from Makassar made concerted efforts to seek redress from Jakarta. However, these efforts were met with limited success, leading to the formal declaration of the Pemesta movement in March 1957. Initially centered in Makassar, the movement's headquarters eventually shifted to Manado in North Sulawesi due to waning support in South Sulawesi. The Pemesta movement gained significant momentum when it aligned with the PRRI rebellion in Sumatra in February 1958. This alliance marked a critical juncture, as both movements sought to challenge the central government's authority through coordinated efforts. However, following successful military offensives by Indonesian government forces against PRRI in Sumatra, the conflict's focus shifted to the eastern regions where Pemesta was based. The military aspect of the Pemesta rebellion saw intense confrontations between government forces and the rebels. By the end of June 1958, government troops had captured Manado, a significant blow to the Pemesta movement. Despite this setback, the rebels continued their struggle, adopting guerrilla tactics that prolonged the conflict. The guerrilla warfare phase was marked by strategic relocations, covert operations, and sporadic clashes, as the rebels sought to undermine government control and sustain their resistance. Leadership within the Pemesta movement faced significant challenges during this period. Key leaders such as Sumuel, Kawilarang, Wao, and Somba operated from different locations, making communication and coordination increasingly difficult. This fragmentation of command led to internal discord and clashes between various factions within the rebel forces. The capture and subsequent execution of Wao, a prominent mediator within the movement, exemplified the internal strife and deteriorating cohesiveness among the rebels. Efforts to resolve the conflict eventually led to the surrender of the last remnants of the Pemesta rebels in 1961, followed by the granting of amnesty. The rebellion had taken a heavy toll, resulting in the deaths of approximately 4,000 government soldiers and 2,000 Pemesta rebels. The resolution of the rebellion marked the end of a significant chapter in Indonesia's struggle to establish a unified national identity amidst regional and ethnic diversity. The Pemesta rebellion, while ultimately unsuccessful in achieving its goals, had profound implications for Indonesia's political landscape. It highlighted the deep-seated regional disparities and the urgent need for more inclusive and equitable governance. The central government's response to the rebellion, which combined military action with eventual concessions and amnesty, reflected a pragmatic approach to maintaining national unity while addressing some of the underlying grievances. The Pemesta Rebellion of 1957 to 1961 was a complex and multifaceted conflict that underscored the challenges of nation-building in post-colonial Indonesia. Driven by economic, ethnic, and political discontent, the rebellion was a significant expression of regional frustrations with Jakarta's centralized governance. While the rebellion did not achieve its immediate objectives, it played a crucial role in shaping Indonesia's approach to regional autonomy and governance. The legacy of the Pemesta Rebellion serves as a reminder of the importance of addressing regional disparities and fostering inclusive policies to ensure national cohesion and stability. Transforming Iraq. The 14th of July Revolution. The 14th of July Revolution of 1958 was a pivotal moment in Iraqi history, marking the end of the Hashemite monarchy and the establishment of the Iraqi Republic. This military coup, orchestrated by the Free Officers Movement, was a significant event in the Arab world, reflective of the broader currents of Arab nationalism and anti-colonial sentiment prevalent in the mid-20th century. The revolution not only reshaped Iraq's political landscape but also had far-reaching implications for the region's geopolitics. Since its establishment in 1921, the Kingdom of Iraq had been under the rule of the Hashemite monarchy, which was closely aligned with British interests. This relationship, however, fostered significant discontent among various segments of Iraqi society, particularly within the military and among nationalist groups. The post-World War II era saw the rise of Arab nationalism, a movement that sought to unify Arab countries and reduce Western influence in the region. Iraq, under King Faisal II, became a member of the Baghdad Pact in 1955, a pro-Western defense alliance that included Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, and the United Kingdom. This alignment with Western powers, particularly during the Suez Crisis of 1956 when Iraq supported the British-led invasion of Egypt, further fueled nationalist resentment. Economic issues also played a crucial role. Despite Iraq's oil wealth, economic disparities and widespread poverty persisted. Prime Minister Nouri al-Said's policies, which were seen as favoring the elite and foreign interests, were highly unpopular. The military, which had a history of involvement in politics, became increasingly restless, viewing the monarchy as incapable of addressing the country's socio-economic problems and its subservience to Western powers. The revolution was meticulously planned by the Free Officers Movement, a group of nationalist military officers inspired by the Egyptian Revolution of 1952, which had overthrown King Farouk. The leading figures in the Iraqi Revolution were Brigadier Obad al-Karim Qasim and Colonel Abdul Salam Arif. On the morning of the 14th of July 1958, the 19th Brigade, commanded by Qasim and Arif, moved from its base in Jalala towards Baghdad. The plan was to seize key government buildings and radio stations, and to eliminate the royal family. The operation was swift and effective. Within hours, they had taken control of Baghdad. King Faisal II, Crown Prince Obad al-Ila, and Prime Minister Nouri al-Said were all killed. The monarchy was abolished, and Iraq was declared a republic. The new government, led by Qasim, sought to distance itself from Western influence and align more closely with the Arab nationalist movement and the Soviet Union. The immediate aftermath of the revolution saw significant changes in Iraq's political and social structure. Qasim's government implemented a series of reforms aimed at addressing the economic inequalities that had plagued the country. Land reforms were introduced to redistribute land from large landowners to poor farmers. Efforts were also made to improve infrastructure, education, and healthcare. However, the new regime faced significant challenges. The coalition that had supported the revolution was diverse, comprising various political ideologies including communists, nationalists, and Baathists. This ideological diversity led to internal conflicts and power struggles. Qasim's attempt to balance these competing interests ultimately proved difficult, leading to political instability. The 14th of July revolution had profound implications for the Middle East. It marked a significant victory for Arab nationalism and inspired similar movements across the Arab world. The overthrow of a pro-Western monarchy and the establishment of a republic aligned with nationalist and socialist principles resonated with many in the region. The revolution also affected Iraq's foreign relations. The new government withdrew from the Baghdad Pact, signaling a shift away from the West and towards the Soviet Union. This realignment was part of the broader Cold War dynamics, where the Middle East became a battleground for influence between the United States and the Soviet Union. Iraq's relations with neighboring Arab countries were also impacted. The revolution ended the short-lived Arab Federation between Iraq and Jordan, a union that had been established earlier in 1958. Jordan, ruled by another branch of the Hashemite family, viewed the overthrow of its Iraqi counterpart with alarm. Conversely, Egypt, under President Jamal Abdel Nasser, welcomed the revolution as a victory for Arab nationalism. In the long term, the 14th of July revolution set the stage for decades of political turbulence in Iraq. While the immediate post-revolution period saw some progressive reforms, the lack of a cohesive political vision and the rivalry among different factions led to instability. Qasim's government was overthrown in 1963 by a coalition of Baathists and military officers, leading to a series of coups and counter-coups. The legacy of the revolution is complex. It ended a monarchy that was seen as a vestige of colonialism, and initiated a period of republican rule. However, the promise of a stable, prosperous, and independent Iraq remained elusive. The political instability and authoritarianism that followed the revolution contributed to the country's ongoing challenges. The 14th of July Revolution of 1958 was a transformative event in Iraqi history, bringing an end to the Hashemite monarchy, and establishing the Iraqi Republic. It was driven by a combination of nationalist sentiment, economic discontent, and a desire to reduce Western influence. While the revolution had significant immediate impacts, both domestically and regionally, its long-term legacy is marked by political instability and unrealized aspirations. The revolution remains a critical moment in understanding Iraq's modern history and its ongoing quest for stability and development. The Second Taiwan Strait Crisis. A Cold War confrontation. The Second Taiwan Strait Crisis of 1958 was a significant episode in the Cold War, involving the People's Republic of China, the PRC, and the Republic of China, the ROC, backed by the United States. This conflict highlighted the geopolitical tensions in East Asia, and demonstrated the complexities of U.S. foreign policy during the Cold War era. The origins of the Second Taiwan Strait Crisis can be traced back to the Chinese Civil War, which resulted in the Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, establishing the People's Republic of China on the mainland, while the Nationalist Party, the Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek, retreated to Taiwan. The First Taiwan Strait Crisis in 1954 to 1955 had already set the stage for continued hostilities between the two sides, with sporadic artillery duels and skirmishes becoming a norm in the region. The crisis began on August 23, 1958, when the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, of the PRC launched a massive artillery bombardment on the Quemoy, or Kinmen, and Matsu Islands, which were controlled by the ROC. The islands were of strategic importance as they were located just off the coast of mainland China, and controlling them would give the PRC a significant advantage in its aim to reclaim Taiwan. The PRC's assault on the islands involved extensive use of artillery and air attacks, aiming to wear down the ROC's defenses. The ROC, under Chiang Kai-shek, responded with fierce resistance, fortified by U.S. military support. The United States, under President Dwight D. Eisenhower, viewed the defense of Taiwan and its outlying islands as crucial to containing the spread of communism in Asia. The U.S. involvement in the crisis was a critical factor. The United States 7th Fleet was deployed to the Taiwan Strait to provide logistical support, and to escort ROC convoys resupplying the besieged islands. American F-86 Sabre jets, equipped with advanced Sidewinder missiles, were supplied to the ROC Air Force, giving them a technological edge over the PLA's MiG-15 and MiG-17 fighters. One of the most dramatic aspects of the Second Taiwan Strait Crisis was the implied threat of nuclear weapons. There were discussions within the U.S. administration about the potential use of tactical nuclear weapons to defend Taiwan. Although these discussions never resulted in action, they underscored the seriousness with which the U.S. regarded the defense of Taiwan and the lengths it was willing to go to prevent a communist takeover. Diplomatically, the crisis involved intense negotiations and back-channel communications. The Soviet Union, an ally of the PRC, was cautious about escalating the conflict into a full-blown war that could potentially involve nuclear weapons. Ultimately, a tacit agreement was reached where the PRC ceased its bombardment of the islands on odd-numbered days, while the ROC ceased theirs on even-numbered days, leading to a de facto ceasefire. The Second Taiwan Strait crisis had several significant consequences. The crisis demonstrated the effectiveness of the US military's advanced technology, particularly the use of Sidewinder missiles, which greatly enhanced the ROC's defensive capabilities. It strengthened US-Taiwan relations. The crisis solidified the US-Taiwan military alliance and reassured the ROC of continued American support in the face of communist aggression. For the PRC, the crisis highlighted the limitations of its military capabilities against a technologically superior adversary, leading to a strategic reassessment and eventual military modernization. The crisis was a microcosm of the broader Cold War dynamics, where local conflicts had the potential to escalate into superpower confrontations. It underscored the importance of careful diplomatic maneuvering and the risks associated with military brinkmanship. The Second Taiwan Strait crisis was a pivotal event in the Cold War, encapsulating the tensions between the communist and capitalist blocs. It showcased the strategic importance of Taiwan in the US policy of containment and highlighted the complexities of Sino-American relations. The resolution of the crisis through a combination of military strength and diplomatic negotiations set a precedent for future confrontations in the region, emphasizing the delicate balance required to maintain peace and stability in East Asia. A Cold War flashpoint. The Berlin Crisis of 1958 to 1959. The Berlin Crisis of 1958 to 1959 was a crucial moment in the Cold War, highlighting the deep-seated tensions and ideological divide between the Soviet Union and the Western powers. Several factors contributed to the escalation of tensions in Berlin. First, the city's unique status as an island of Western democracy within Communist East Germany made it a symbol of the Cold War struggle. West Berlin's economic prosperity and political freedom stood in stark contrast to the repression and hardship experienced in East Germany, leading to a massive exodus of East Germans to the West. This brain drain threatened the stability of the East German regime and fueled Soviet anxieties. Second, the issue of German reunification remained unresolved. The Western powers, particularly the United States, sought a reunified Germany integrated into the Western Alliance, while the Soviet Union feared a strong, unified Germany allied with the West. These conflicting visions for Germany's future created a fundamental disagreement that fueled the crisis. The crisis began in November 1958, when Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev issued an ultimatum to the Western powers, demanding that they withdraw their forces from West Berlin within 6 months. Khrushchev threatened to sign a separate peace treaty with East Germany, which would have given the East German government control over access to West Berlin. This ultimatum raised fears of a Soviet blockade of West Berlin, similar to the one that had occurred in 1948 to 1949. The Western powers, led by the United States, rejected Khrushchev's ultimatum, and reaffirmed their commitment to defending West Berlin. They initiated a series of diplomatic negotiations with the Soviet Union, while simultaneously preparing for a potential military confrontation. The crisis reached its peak in the summer of 1959, as both sides engaged in a war of nerves, with military maneuvers and propaganda campaigns aimed at intimidating the other. The crisis was eventually diffused through a combination of diplomatic pressure, military deterrence, and Khrushchev's own realization that a military conflict over Berlin would be too risky. In September 1959, Khrushchev visited the United States and met with President Dwight D. Eisenhower at Camp David. While no formal agreement was reached, the two leaders established a personal rapport and agreed to continue negotiations on the Berlin issue. Although the Berlin crisis was ultimately resolved without a military conflict, it had significant consequences for the Cold War. First, it solidified the division of Germany and Berlin, with the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961 further cementing this separation. The wall became a physical manifestation of the Cold War divide and a symbol of communist repression. Second, the crisis intensified the arms race between the Soviet Union and the Western powers, as both sides sought to maintain a military advantage. This led to an escalation of defense spending and the development of new weapons systems, further fueling the Cold War rivalry. Third, the crisis highlighted the importance of diplomacy and negotiation in resolving international conflicts. The willingness of both sides to engage in dialogue and seek a peaceful resolution to the crisis prevented a potentially catastrophic war. In conclusion, the Berlin Crisis of 1958 to 1959 was a critical moment in the Cold War, revealing the deep-seated tensions and ideological divide between the Soviet Union and the Western powers. Although the crisis was ultimately resolved without a military conflict, it had significant consequences for the Cold War, including the solidification of the division of Germany, the intensification of the arms race, and the importance of diplomacy in resolving international conflicts. The Berlin Crisis serves as a reminder of the dangers of brinkmanship and the importance of finding peaceful solutions to complex global challenges. A struggle for freedom and identity. The Tibetan Uprising of 1959. The causes of the Tibetan Uprising can be traced back to the Chinese invasion and subsequent occupation of Tibet in 1950. The Chinese government, under the leadership of Mao Zedong, sought to integrate Tibet into the People's Republic of China, the PRC, viewing it as an integral part of Chinese territory. However, this integration was met with resistance from many Tibetans, who cherished their unique cultural identity, religious traditions, and political autonomy. The Chinese authorities implemented policies aimed at suppressing Tibetan culture and religion, including the destruction of monasteries, the persecution of religious leaders, and the imposition of communist ideology. These policies alienated many Tibetans and fueled resentment towards the Chinese government. Additionally, the forced collectivization of agriculture and the implementation of socialist economic reforms led to widespread economic hardship and social disruption, further exacerbating tensions between Tibetans and the Chinese authorities. The uprising began on March 10, 1959, in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. Thousands of Tibetans, including monks, nuns, and ordinary citizens, took to the streets to protest against Chinese rule and demand the withdrawal of Chinese troops from Tibet. The protests quickly escalated into a full-scale uprising, with Tibetans engaging in armed resistance against Chinese forces. The Dalai Lama, the spiritual and political leader of Tibet, was initially reluctant to support the uprising, hoping for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. However, as the violence intensified and the Chinese authorities threatened his safety, he was forced to flee Tibet and seek refuge in India. This marked a turning point in the uprising, as the Dalai Lama's exile galvanized international support for the Tibetan cause. The Chinese government responded to the uprising with brutal force, deploying troops to suppress the rebellion and restore order. The fighting lasted for several weeks, resulting in the deaths of thousands of Tibetans and the destruction of numerous cultural and religious sites. The uprising was eventually quelled, but the Tibetan resistance movement continued to operate underground, engaging in guerrilla warfare and acts of sabotage against Chinese targets. The Tibetan uprising had profound consequences for Tibet and its people. The brutal suppression of the uprising led to a massive exodus of Tibetans, with over 80,000 fleeing to neighboring countries, primarily India and Nepal. The Dalai Lama established a government in exile in Dharamsala, India, which continues to advocate for Tibetan rights and autonomy. The uprising also had a significant impact on international perceptions of China and Tibet. The brutal crackdown on the Tibetan protesters drew widespread condemnation from the international community, highlighting the human rights abuses perpetrated by the Chinese government. The Tibetan issue became a focal point for international advocacy groups and governments, who called for a peaceful resolution to the conflict and the protection of Tibetan culture and identity. Within Tibet, the uprising led to a tightening of Chinese control and a further erosion of Tibetan autonomy. The Chinese authorities intensified their efforts to suppress Tibetan culture and religion, implementing policies aimed at Sinicizing Tibetan society and integrating it into the mainstream Chinese culture. These policies have had a devastating impact on Tibetan language, traditions, and way of life, leading to a loss of cultural identity and a sense of alienation among many Tibetans. The Tibetan Uprising of 1959 was a watershed moment in Tibet's history, marking a turning point in the Tibetan struggle for freedom and self-determination. The uprising was a testament to the resilience and determination of the Tibetan people, who, despite facing overwhelming odds, rose up against Chinese rule in defense of their cultural identity and way of life. The uprising had far-reaching consequences, leading to the exile of the Dalai Lama and thousands of Tibetans, the intensification of Chinese control over Tibet, and the erosion of Tibetan culture and autonomy. The Tibetan issue continues to be a source of tension between China and the international community, with ongoing calls for a peaceful resolution to the conflict and the protection of Tibetan rights and freedoms. A proxy conflict in Southeast Asia. The Laotian Civil War. The origins of the Laotian Civil War can be traced back to the country's colonial past and its strategic location amidst the escalating Cold War tensions. Laos, a former French colony, gained independence in 1953, but its fragile political landscape was soon marred by internal divisions and external interference. The country's mountainous terrain, diverse ethnic groups, and weak central government made it vulnerable to competing ideologies and foreign intervention. The Pathet Lao, a communist-inspired movement led by Prince Souphanouvong, emerged as a powerful force seeking to overthrow the Royal Lao government, which was supported by the United States. The Pathet Lao's ideology aligned with that of the Vietnamese communists, who were fighting against American-backed forces in the neighboring Vietnam War. This ideological affinity and shared anti-imperialist goals fostered a close alliance between the Pathet Lao and the Vietnamese communists, leading to their active involvement in the Laotian conflict. The United States, driven by its containment policy aimed at preventing the spread of communism, viewed Laos as a crucial domino in Southeast Asia. Fearing a communist takeover of Laos and its potential repercussions for neighboring countries, the US government provided military and financial aid to the Royal Lao government, transforming the conflict into a proxy war. The Soviet Union and China, on the other hand, supported the Pathet Lao, providing them with weapons, training, and logistical assistance. The Laotian Civil War was characterized by a series of shifting alliances, covert operations, and intense fighting in the country's rugged terrain. The conflict unfolded in three distinct phases. Phase 1, 1953 to 1962. This phase was marked by the initial clashes between the Royal Lao government and the Pathet Lao. The Pathet Lao, aided by the Vietnamese communists, made significant territorial gains, controlling vast areas of the country's mountainous north and east. The US government responded by increasing its military aid to the Royal Lao government, and deploying CIA-backed paramilitary forces to fight alongside the Laotian army. Phase 2, 1962 to 1973. This phase was characterized by a stalemate, as both sides struggled to gain a decisive advantage. The US government intensified its covert bombing campaign, targeting Pathet Lao strongholds and supply lines. The bombing, which was largely kept secret from the American public, caused widespread devastation and civilian casualties. The Pathet Lao, however, continued to receive support from their communist allies and managed to hold their ground. Phase 3, 1973 to 1975. This final phase saw a decisive victory for the Pathet Lao. The signing of the Paris Peace Accords in 1973, which ended American involvement in the Vietnam War, had a significant impact on the Laotian conflict. The withdrawal of American support weakened the Royal Lao government, while the Pathet Lao, emboldened by their Vietnamese allies' victory, launched a major offensive. In 1975, the Pathet Lao seized control of the capital, Vientiane, and established the Lao People's Democratic Republic, a communist state. The Laotian Civil War had devastating consequences for the country and its people. The protracted conflict resulted in widespread destruction, displacement, and loss of life. The US bombing campaign, in particular, caused immense suffering, with an estimated 2 million tons of bombs dropped on Laos, making it the most heavily bombed country per capita in history. The war also had a profound impact on the region. The victory of the Pathet Lao and the establishment of a communist regime in Laos strengthened the communist bloc in Southeast Asia, and contributed to the fall of neighboring Cambodia to the Khmer Rouge. The war's legacy continues to haunt Laos today, with unexploded ordnance still posing a threat to civilians and hindering development efforts. The Laotian Civil War serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of proxy conflicts and the devastating consequences of Cold War interventions. The conflict's complex dynamics, involving multiple actors with competing interests, highlight the challenges of resolving conflicts in a region marked by political instability and external interference. In the next chapter, we will cover the Basque conflict in Spain, as well as the formation of the Viet Cong, and the Luna 2 and Luna 3 missions, the first successful landing on the Moon's surface, and the first images of the far side.